And so the dream becomes reality as the plane touches down at Athens airport one bright summer's day. Now you're in Greece, land of the ancient myths, land of the culture which goes back centuries, millennia. In Athens, the buildings and monuments link the present with the distant past. The modern city is like modern cities anywhere. But some columns here, a statue there, tell us of the glory that was Greece. The people who live in this city today are surrounded by reminders that its history goes back thousands of years. The fine neoclassical buildings in the center of the city bring the vitality of the 19th century to mind, vitality which helped to turn this city into the modern contrabation it is today, and to bring 3 million people to live in the greater Athens area. The pace of life in the Greek capital today is suited to the demands of the late 20th century. The town plan was drawn up 150 years ago by Greek and Bavarian architects and planners. The site of the center of the city has been occupied by men for thousands of years. Next to the buildings that stand there today and under the ground on which we walk are other buildings and ruins dating from all the periods of human history. When you walk through Athens, it is sometimes difficult to tell where one age ends and another begins. One of the historians who have specialized in the study of Athenian history has written, "What there is more than a yard of earth between ancient Athens and the medieval city, and the same is true of the divisions between other ages. Every corner of Athens, every street, and almost every building shows a direct or indirect connection with the past. Constitution Square lies at the very heart of the city, the most cosmopolitan of Athenian squares. It is bounded on one side of the old royal palace, which today houses the Greek Parliament. In front of this imposing edifice is the monument to the unknown soldier, where parades take place, national anniversaries are celebrated, and worths laid. The soldiers of the Presidential Guard, in their traditional costumes, lend a touch of rural color to the urban scene. Right next to the Parliament building and Constitution Square are the National Gardens, where Athenian young and old find peace and relaxation in shady lanes and beside artificial ponds. From there, the Acropolis can be seen on its rock, the most sacred part of the city since thousands of years before the birth of Christ. Around the Acropolis are the ruins of other important ancient buildings, such as the Herod Atticus Theatre, where some of the events which form the Athens Festival are held each summer. To climb from Athens up to the Acropolis is one of the dreams which brings millions of tourists to Greece each year. They come from every corner of the earth to take a step back into the golden age of the ancient Athens. The light embraces the imposing columns and shows off their grace and harmony. The Parthenon is the crowning glory of the Acropolis. Built in the 5th century before Christ, it was the temple of the goddess Athena. The names of the architects were Ectinos and Callicrates and Phidias. The famous sculptor supervised the building and executed the decoration. The Erechtheion, an elegant building in the Ionian style, also stands on the Acropolis, with the caryats which form the side of it, that which faces the Parthenon. The view from the Acropolis over the city of Athens and the plain of Attica is one of the world's most impressive. The buildings of the modern city surround, but do not obscure, the archaeological sites and the monuments of past ages. There's the ancient agora, the marketplace, and there's a temple of Hephaestus, properly supposed to be dedicated to the Zeus, and there's a Byzantine church from the Middle Ages. The old quarter of Plaka, with its neoclassical buildings, its simple one, and two-story houses, and its picturesque alleys with their flights of steps, lies at the foot of the Acropolis. Among the tavernas, restaurants, bars, and coffee shops, and next to the old houses, one comes across archaeological sites with ruins from classical, Hellenistic, and Roman times. There are buildings from the Turkish period too. In the Roman agora stands the peculiar octagonal building which in ancient times was a water clock, the clock of Kiristos, and which is now called the Tower of the Winds, from the friezes which encircle it. The reconstructed Stoa of Attalus is another of the impressive buildings in this area. Nearby is the temple of Hephaestus, the best preserved of all the ancient temples to survive today. No matter where you look, the eye returns to the Acropolis, the sacred rock crowned by the Parthenon, which is the standard against which the plasticity and harmony of all Greek monuments are to be measured. The National Archaeological Museum in the center of the city is world famous from the antiquities it has to show. The exhibits come from all over the country. There are statues and sculptures from all the periods of Greek history which provide a representative picture of the art of the prehistoric, classical, and later periods. The famous bronze statue of Poseidon found at Cape Artemision impresses the visitor with its grace and likeness. It is surrounded by other statues of gods and heroes, such as the statue of Apollo found at the theater of Dionysus in Athens. The famous bronze group of the horse and its boy rider comes from a shipwreck off Cape Artemision. And yet more statues of young men, gods, heroes, figures of mythology, Apollo, Zeus, Aphrodite, and a satyr. "6 miles from Athens, in the city's port, Piraeus, with its commercial harbor and little anchorages, men have gone down to the sea in ships here since the dawn of history, and things are no different today. Even if the equipment is more modern, many tourists enjoy a meal at the little harbor of the Mikrolimano or Turkolimano, or at the Zea Marina, where fresh fish and seafood can be sampled next to the water, where the fishing boats and yachts bob and plunge. Cape Sunio, a site first inhabited from 5,000 years ago, lies 40 miles from Athens. On the highest point of the rock, looking out over the ocean, is the majestic temple of Poseidon. The work of the architect who built the temple of Hephaestus in Athens. Nearby was another ancient temple to the goddess Athena. The remains of the temple of Poseidon give today some idea of its beauty in ancient times, while reminding us of the myth of the tragic king Aegeus. It was here that Aegeus awaited the return of Theseus, his son, from his encounter with the Minotaur. Theseus had killed the Minotaur and was coming home in triumph, but he and his companions made the terrible mistake of forgetting to hoist white sails, the sign of victory, on their ship. Aegeus saw from afar the black sails with which they had set out, and believing that Theseus had been killed, plunged into the sea in despair. This myth, they say, explains why the sea is known as the Aegean, an eternal monument to the tragic king of Athens. Delphi and its surroundings are among the most ancient holy places in Greece. The famous oracle, where here was issuing its prophecies in prehistoric times, and the mystical rites and traditions of Delphi were respected by all the Greek world and by many other peoples. The ancient Greeks believed that Delphi was the center of the world and placed here a stone which represented the navel of the earth, with unusual symbolic markings. As in Athens and at Sunio, the goddess Athena was worshipped at Delphi, even in very early times. The remains of her temple can still be seen today, together with the enigmatic circular tholos. But it was Apollo who was a chief deity at Delphi and gave the site its international fame. Apollo, god of light, god of music, personification of the sun and patron of the arts. His temple was one of the most renowned and most accomplished edifices of antiquity, and Apollo's oracle at Delphi was famed throughout East and West for the wisdom and obscurity of its pronouncements. The Greeks and leaders of many other peoples expressed their thanks to Pythian Apollo with the richness and abundance of their dedications. The idea of the Amphioctinic League, peaceful religious groups which later developed into strong political unions amongst the Greek cities, was born at Delphi. The wonderful theatre at Delphi and its stadium were the scene in the third year of each Olympiad of the Pythian Games, which were Panhellenic and included contests in music, athletics and horse racing. At this same theatre were theatrical performances and other events are held each summer. The modern Greek poet Angelos Ikelianos envisaged and brought to life his Delphic celebrations. The purpose of the celebrations, which were held in the pre-war period, was the revive of the Amphictyonic Leagues in a new and modern form in the struggle for international peace and cooperation. To the North Tower, the Phaeacides rocks, and below them the sacred waters of the Castalian springs, the speaking waters of the ancients, still run in their gorge. The celebrated charioteer statue stands in the Delphi Archaeological Museum, one of the finest examples of ancient art. It dates from 478 BC and originally stood on a chariot. The statue was dedicated by Gelo, tyrant of Gela and Syracuse, after a victory in the Pythian Games. The folds in the robe, the expression on the face, and the positioning of the body and the hand holding the reins are particularly impressive. Some scholars think that the statue was dedicated by some other leader, not Gelo, and it has also been said that it personifies the anonymous victor of the chariot race. But however the case may be, the charioteer is still one of the most outstanding bronze statues from classical Greece. Another of the famous statues in the Museum of Delphi is the Sphinx of Naxos, which dates from the 6th century before Christ. As the inscription on the base of the statue states, the Naxians dedicated it in order to gain the right for preference in the handing down of the oracle's pronouncements. The Sphinx stood on a tall column in the temple of Apollo. The two archaic chori, gifts of the people of Argos, depicting Cleobs and Biton, are also regarded as supreme examples of ancient art. A visit to Delphi, with its incredible position among the mountains and above the sea, and with its reminders of a glorious past, cannot fail to be one of the climaxes of any stay in Greece. The Corinth Canal separates the Peloponnese from mainland Greece. Nearby lies the modern city of Corinth, and above it the Acropolis, an imposing rock crowned by a castle. The ancient city of Corinth lies across the feet of the mountain, its ruins testifying to its ancient grandeur. Corinth was so rich from its commerce and shipping that ancients used to say that the journey to Corinth was what we might call taking coals to Newcastle. The main archaeological site contains ruins of the ancient agora, with its shops, temples, little factories of the famous rostrum of the orators from which the Apostle Paul preached to the Corinthians of the message of Christ. Doric columns remind us of the splendor of the buildings which stood here, and the Corinthian style is exemplified by the capitals of the type which bears the city's name. The columns of the archaic temple of Apollo are made from single pieces of stone, which was very rare in antiquity. Now we go further back into the depths of the history of the Greek world, to the 2nd and 3rd millennium BC. Mycenae, the myths say, the city was founded by the hero Perseus, son of Zeus and Danae, who brought the Cyclopes back from the Asia with him. They built the Cyclopean walls of huge blocks of stone round the Acropolis. The great age of Mycenae began around the beginning of the 16th century BC. Mycenaean civilization developed in parallel with the Minoan Empire in Crete, and when that was destroyed, the Mycenaeans took the lead in the economic and cultural life of the Greek world. Their empire had commercial relations which spread out over almost all the Mediterranean area, and they ruled over a large part of the known Greek world and non-Greek until the 11th century BC. The second dynasty of their rulers, the Peloponnesians or Atrides, raised Mycenae to the height of its power and fame. The tragic history of this ill-starred family, and especially of Agamemnon, commander of the Greek forces in the Trojan War, was provided poets and writers of both ancient and modern times with material for their imaginations to work upon. Archaeologists were led by excessive zeal and the influence of the myths to name one of these the treasury of Athens or the tomb of Agamemnon. But this cannot be so, since the tombs were built 4 centuries before Agamemnon lived. Our journey continues and the impressions pile up. Is another of the towns in the Peloponnese that can trace their history back to prehistoric times. The town was important when Greece was ruled by Franklin adventurers, when it was under Turkish control, and in modern times. Nafplio was liberated from the Turks in 1822, and in 1828 the first governor of the modern Greek state, Ioannis Kapodistrias, landed at the harbor here. Nafplio was the capital of Greece from 1823 to 1834, and a fine town with attractive neoclassical buildings grew up under the shadow of the twin castles of Palamidi and Acropolis. The fame of the ancient theatre at Epidaurus, work of the Argive sculptor and architect Polycletus, is worldwide. The theatre has been restored and has unique acoustics for which it was renewed in ancient times, and sitting an audience of 14,000. The Epidaurus festival, with performances of ancient tragedies and comedies and other events, is held here every summer. Ancient Epidaurus was also known in antiquity for its Asclepion, a sanctuary dedicated to the worship of the doctor and deity Asclepios. Sufferers from various diseases flocked to Epidaurus to be cured from all over Greece and from other parts of the world. Cases of almost miraculous cures, including the bringing back to life of the dead, have been recorded and handed down by tradition and still cause amazement in the scientific world. Who knows what the talents and skills of Asclepius, who was said to be the son of the god Apollo, may have been? Mystery shrouds his name. Sitting in the ancient theatre today, we try to imagine what the magnificent performances of ancient times must have been like. And perhaps our eyes travel further to the ruined Asclepion, and we may try to comprehend the secrets of the treatment that raised the dead, and to comprehend with the eyes of the soul, not the body. The world-famous statue of Hermes by Praxiteles is today in the Archaeological Museum at Olympia. Olympia was the home of a very ancient form of worship, which developed in the inspired and inspring spirit of noble sporting competition and the establishment of the holy truths observed each time the Olympic Games were held. In 776 BC, the victory of the runner Corybus was recorded, and this date is taken at the first Olympiad, while at the same time marking the beginning of the historic period in Greece. Thus, apart from their importance as a symbol of human brotherhood and fair competition, the Olympic Games are also valuable as the basis for the dating system of the ancient Greeks. The Games, which were held in honor of Olympian Zeus, originally consisted of only one event, the foot race, and they lasted only one day. Later, other events were added: the double race, the long-distance race, the pentathlon, wrestling, boxing, and chariot race, the mounted race, the pancration, and events for boys. By the classical period, there were 18 events, and the whole festival lasted 5 days. Athletes came from all over Greece and the colonies beyond the frontiers of the mother country, and did not compete in the hope of breaking records. An honorable victory was what they desired. Olympic winners were crowned with the wreaths of leaves from an ancient olive tree which stood outside the majestic temple of Zeus. Anyone who was victorious 3 times had the right to set up a statue of himself on a site designed for this purpose. In addition to the events for men and boys, special events for girls were also held every 4 years. They were called the Heranian Games and were in honor of the goddess Hera, who was also worshipped in the area. Although the Olympic Games had lost something of their glory by the 4th century BC, they continued to be held until 393 AD, when the Byzantine Emperor Theodosius I suppressed them. After that, the once holy site was neglected. For earthquakes knocked down the fine buildings. The river Alphios altered its course in the Middle Ages and swept right through the center of the ancient Altis. Silt brought down by the river covered and protected the remains of the site until excavations began systematically in the last century. Our trip continues. From the mainland, the sea extends a tempting invitation to sail for the islands. Hospitable harbors appear off our bow and the ship approaches. Your first reaction on sighting Mykonos is to close your eyes against the light. The whitewashed houses, the sparkling churches, and the bare earth reflect light which flows out to engulf everything. The houses are white and cubic in shape. Arches and curved lines are few and far between. Their careful and regular whitewashing shows that the Mykonos housewife is proud of her little house and indicates that there is an island with a tradition of civilization. Among the most characteristic features of bygone days are the windmills and the hill above the town and in the old quarter Alefkandra. The bright colors in which doors and wooden shutters are painted try in vain to deny the absolute supremacy of white. We reach the upper floors of the buildings by stone or wooden outside staircases, which are crammed with flower pots, as are the little wooden or stone balconies and the narrow country yards around the houses. There are over 400 churches on Mykonos. Most are painted blindingly white, and some have a dome or semicircular roof in blue or deep red. In some alleyways, there are more churches than houses. Of course, all the churches are tiny, and very few of them have parishes attached. They are built by God-fearing islanders who had promised their lord of church in return for safe deliverance from some danger at sea. They are simple in style and far from rich, but entirely in keeping with the lines of the unique popular architecture of the Cyclades Islands. The streets of Mykonos are narrow and paved. The outlines of the paving stones are whitewashed by the housewives, thus underlining the cleanliness and providing a decorative touch at the same time. Le Corbusier, the famous architect and town planner, said on seeing Mykonos that whatever architecture had to say, it has said it here. It is difficult, if not impossible, to state in words what popular architecture has said in Mykonos. Only the visitor can get close to it, live with it, and within the full range of its majesty. Life on Mykonos in the summer has much to offer. Swimming and sea sports along the wide and beautiful beacons, visits by bus, taxi, three-wheeler or mop to spots in the countryside or smaller villages on the island, wild nights in the bars, taverna and cosmopolitan clubs, visits to the museums and archaeological sites. The bars and discos keep it up until the small hours every night in the summer, and many other large resort centers would be jealous of them. The main streets of Mykonos town to nowadays are one crown multilingual bazaar, where Mykonos folk art and more peculiar forms of clothing and ornamentation are on sale. Mykonos woven cloth and the island's knitwear are internationally famous and have been adopted to the demands of haute couture. Luxury goods such as furs, jewelry, and so on are also available, and there are art galleries displaying important collections of paintings and other art forms. Above all, the thing which is important and different about Mykonos, more perhaps than the hospitality of the islanders, more perhaps even than its beauty and charm, is the boundless feeling of freedom from care which it encourages. Every visitor to the island can live, express himself, and enjoy himself or herself as he or she may wish, and that will frequently include taking a part in the life of the 2 nudist beaches the island can offer. In Mykonos you can live as you like, in luxury, in comfort, with only the barest of essentials, with economy, in a cosmopolitan style, or in peace and isolation. Every taste is catered for, every desire and every pocket. It is up to the visitor to choose the way in which he or she will live. But even if you don't want to live life on Mykonos to the full, the island's beauty and charm and the warmth and hospitality of its inhabitants will be your first, lasting experiences. Mykonos was internationally known in the past as a way station on the trip to Delos. Today things are the other way round, and a trip to Delos is one more attraction of the beautiful island of the white houses, the churches and the windmills. Delos is a small island with a big history, the site of a famous ancient city. This interfertile little island was the starting point of one of the most important religious and commercial phenomena of the ancient world. Along with Delphi, Olympia, and Epidaurus, Delos, mythical home of Apollo and his sister Artemis, was for 1,000 years a religious center for all of the Greek world. And this, along with its position of the center of the Cyclades group of islands, meant that thousands of pilgrims could reach the island easily and that its commercial life flourished. The first inhabitants of Delos arrived about 3,000 years before the birth of Christ. It was they who laid the foundations of the Aegean civilization and spread out to the colonies, all the islands in the archipelago. The first period at which Delos reached a peak of prosperity seems to have been under the Mycenaeans, between about 1600 and 1500 BC. Later, about 1000 BC, the island developed into the religious and cultural center as which it is best known. The remains of this famed ancient city lie today beneath the blinding sun of the Cycladic sky. Its best known spot is the Terrace of the Lions, which have been likened to eternal and unsleeping gods of the holy ground of the island. There are also the ruins of temples, private and public buildings, statues, inscriptions, and marvelous mosaics. If we follow the direction in which the lions gaze, we can see a palm tree standing approximately in the middle of the sacred lake. Planted in recent years, the myths say that on ancient Delos, at this spot there stood a similar palm tree, and that Leto clung to it, giving birth to Apollo. But the Aegean has other surprises in store for the traveler. There, in Thera or Santorini, a strange, wild and dry island, which nonetheless conceals fertile soil, is in the little valleys which lie in half-hidden among the steep volcanic cliffs. The main mass of the island is all that remains of a much larger island which towered out of the sea here millions of years ago. Violent geological changes, with parts of the island sinking into the sea and other pieces of land appearing, changed the face of nature and predicts what more or less what we see today. And later, at the time of the terrible eruption which spread destruction as far away as the coast of Crete, the little island Strangili appeared as a mass of molten lava out of the sea and cooled into form. The white houses of Santorini cling fast, high up on the cliffs. The ascent from the harbor used to be a stiff walk on a ride on the back of a donkey, but now there's a cable car to take the visitor up, a trip which should certainly not be missed. The history of the island goes back to the dawn of time. The first inhabitants are traditionally supposed to have been Carians, followed by Cretans, and then Phoenicians. Santorini has seen many peoples and adventures in the course of its thousands of years of history. And, if one believes the theory put forward by two Greek professors, the truth about the island may be stranger still. The myth of Atlantis has been a bone of contention among scientists and historians for very many years. We know a lot about the early history of Santorini. Ruins have been discovered which show the presence and influence of the Dorians and the Ionians, but the most striking finds come to light only a few years ago, when Professor Marinatos and his associates came across the remains of an entire ancient city with wonderful 2- and 3-story buildings, outstanding mosaics, rich hoards of poetry, and many utensils from the daily life of the inhabitants. Marinatos astonished international public opinion by claiming that he had found Atlantis. His theory was that Atlantis was not a continent but a large island. And he placed it on the spot occupied by the sunken land of Santorini. In order to do this, of course, he had to cast doubt on the accuracy of the description attributed to Plato. But nonetheless, his theory provoked international interest and was, and still is, a matter of controversy. However the truth of the matter may be, Santorini today is of great interest for its archaeological sites, apart from its peculiarity as an island of volcanic origin and its Cycladic characteristics of white houses, narrow alleyways, countless steps, and hordes of little churches. At the site itself, which has already revealed so much information about the city which once stood there, excavations continue, and every year new and impressive finds are made. The agent only gives up its secret slowly and after much effort and struggle. Santorini, too, is becoming more cosmopolitan each year as the number of tourists from the rest of Greece and other countries increase. Our voyage continues and leads us south to Crete. Sections of the medieval walls stand above the harbor of Heraclion, an introduction to the unbelievable sight of the Minoan Knossos, which awaits the visitor only 3 or 4 miles further on. Thousands of years ago, Knossos was the heart and brain of Minoan civilization, which made the Cretans master from end to end of the known world. The earliest traces of life on the hill occupied by the Minoan palace have been dated back to Neolithic times, 3 millennia before the birth of Christ. The extent and complexity of the palace of Knossos give us an idea of the degree to which Minoan civilization must have advanced. There is evidence of intense activity on the site as early as 2800 BC, which is when the early Minoan period is reckoned as having begun. Minoan Crete was at the peak of its power in the middle and late Minoan periods between 700 and 1400 BC. Knossos and Minoan Crete are linked with some of the most important of the Greek myths, such as that of Daedalus and Icarus, and that of the fearful Minotaur, which required the sacrifice of young men and girls each year. This myth is also connected with the story of Theseus, who managed to kill the Minotaur and relieve the Athenians of their obligation to send boys and girls to Crete each year to slake the thirst of the beast for human blood. There is a very ancient tradition that the mythical King Minos himself built the city and the palace of Knossos. Even in ruins and partially reconstructed, the palace, with its successive groups of buildings, suggests what the magnificence of the life, wealth, and culture of the Cretans must have been. And the image of the dark and mysterious labyrinth is never far away from your mind at the sight. Many scholars claim that what was meant by the labyrinth was the palace itself, with its multitude of 2- and 3-story buildings, its seemingly endless corridors and streets, its courtyards and galleries, its staircases and sloping levels. All the buildings have technical refinements which cannot astound even the engineers of today. The drainage, heating, and ventilation systems seem to have been planned and installed by architects and engineers of unsurpassed experience and skill. The walls and floors of the buildings, too, with paintings and mosaics, show the skill, strength, and expressiveness of Cretan artists. Apart from the rooms in the central building, numerous buildings of secondary importance have survived in the surrounding area. These include the residence of members of the royal family, workshops and storehouses, religious and ceremonial structure, and so on. On then, over the seas of Greece, roads can be reached either by boat or by plane. This is one of the largest and most beautiful of the islands of Greece. The capital is dominated by the high walls and imposing castle of the Knights of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, who ruled over Rhodes for 213 years, from 1309 to 1522, and ensured its prosperity at that time. The Knights built their edifices over or beside the ruins of the ancient structures, and they fortified the harbor and the town. Later, the Turks added buildings in their own style. Rhodes is one of the major tourist centers of Greece. Every year, thousands of tourists from countries all over the world enjoy its clean beaches, its mountains and forests, and its impressive archaeological sites with the ruins of buildings from many ages. In ancient Greek mythology, there is a lovely story about the birth of Rhodes. After the battle with the giants, which made Zeus master of the earth, the leader of the gods decided to share earth out between the other inhabitants of Olympus. But the god Helios was not present at the share-out, and none thought to keep a piece of land for him. When he returned from his journey, he complained to Zeus, and made him promise to give Helios whatever piece of ground should arise from the sea. And when a beautiful flower-strewn island, Rhodes, raised its head above the waters, Helios poured his eternal light over it and made it the most blessed island in the whole Aegean. Lindos was one of the three rich and powerful city-states of ancient Rhodes. Together with the other two, Camiros and Ilissos, it flourished between the 10th and 6th century BC and founded colonies as far-flung as the coast of Asia Minor or Sicily, of France and of Spain. Above the pretty town of Lindos, with its fine beaches, tower with remains of buildings from a variety of periods. Lindos was famous in the ancient years for its powers and the arts and letters as well as for its commercial and political power. The sculptor Charis, who designed the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the world, was from Lindos. The rocks themselves have stories to tell on the Acropolis of Lindos, and so do the ruins which stand around. And those stories go back to the classical period, to Roman and Byzantine time, to the 2 centuries under the Knights, to the years of Turkish rule. The Apostle Paul landed at Lindos when he came to Rhodes to preach faith in Christ in Rhodes. The Temple of Athena, Lindia, dominates the Acropolis overlooking the town. At the time of the temple's greatest fame, it was a treasure house of works of art. Apart from the statue of the goddess herself, there was a whole host of valuable pieces, including works by major painters of the period, Xerxes, Apelles, and Paracelsus. The 7th ode of Pindar, which sung of the triumphs of the Rhodian Olympic victor Diagoras, was carved on marble inside the temple. Above and beside the ancient buildings are the walls, cannon ports, and doorways of the Castle of the Knights with its later additions. The view in all directions from the Acropolis is unforgettable. The modern village at the foot of the Acropolis is full of traditionally designed mansion houses, which are worth a closer look for the wonderful collections of local pottery, which they contain, and the sculpture and mosaics with which they are adorned. The village of Lindos is a meeting place for tourists from every corner of the earth, and this is what gives the feeling of a direct line from the prehistoric beginnings of the Mycenaean civilization to our society today. The fact that sites like these have always been a crossroads for cultures at so many periods has an undefinable but immense effect on every visitor. Greece has so many places to go and to see that one trip can never exhaust them. This time our journey is over, but the memories of Greece will linger, Greece with its beauty and its thousands of years of history. Greece hopes to see you again, and there will always be a warm welcome.